And good afternoon from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University's College of Aviation Atrium, the President Speaker Series. On behalf of President John Johnson, welcome to the College of Aviation and our special guest in this hour, ladies and gentlemen, Dick Morris.
Thank you.
Dick, thanks for coming, and you really wowed them last night, apparently, at the Lincoln Day dinner. You had them all up and cheering, and then today I know you were with Kit Martin and Sandy Adams. Welcome for squeezing us in here.
Well, good. Thank you. You know, you all are really the epicenter of the change that we're hoping happens on November 2nd. You not only have the Senate seat, you have 3 House seats right here that are in play. We have Sandy Adams, who is running against Suzanne Cosmos. Now, this is the College of Aviation, so she should be in the cosmos. And then we have Daniel Webster, who is running against Alan Grayson. And Alan Grayson?
Yeah,
Marc?
Alan Grayson.
Alan Grayson. And, you know, in 1850s, Stephen Vincent Benet wrote a short story that really summarizes that election. It was called The Devil and Daniel Webster. But I think Daniel Webster is going to beat that devil.
And won't be the victim of being Taliban Dan.
And then we have a third one, which is probably one of the worst members of Congress, is Corrine Brown. She's not only a liberal, she's an incompetent liberal. and just absolutely terrible. And a really good guy named Mike Yost is running against her. And, you know, I think that the Cosmos seat and the Grayson seat were seats that the Republican Party aimed at and felt that they might win. The Corrine Brown seat dropped out of the sky. And it's one of those seats where, as the voters are turning on the Obama administration and learning what he's doing to this country, you're finding a lot of districts where nobody felt there could be a victory that are now turning into probable wins. And but the main message for Florida is that, unlike the biblical prophecy, Meek will not inherit that Senate seat.
Dick Morris, for our radio audience,
it's going to go to Rubio instead.
We're going to take phone calls, and there'll be a book signing at the conclusion of the interview. Dick's book, 2010, Take Back America, and Catastrophe, that he co-wrote with his lovely wife and co-author Eileen McGann. And by the way, our partners from the bookstore are here. They're selling copies of the book, and then Dick will sign them before he wings his way out of here.
The reason we have different last names is when we got married, I refused to change.
And you were on television on Greta last night.
Yeah, I was, and I'm the local Fox affiliate here.
I was going to say, how did you do that? I've been to Fox 35. Did they, like, fly you over, or did they come to you?
Well, I'm at the College of Aeronautics here. What do you expect? No. I drove. It was 45 minutes and drove back and did not get a speeding ticket.
Yeah.
But, you know, this last week, the economists who are in charge of this stuff said that the recession was over. You all having a good time? And they said that it had ended in June of 2009, so it's been over for 14 months. And you know what? They're right. And that is the danger. That's the bad news. This 10% unemployment, this lack of any private sector job creation, this lack of any wage or income growth, this isn't cyclical. Unless we change the federal policies, this is permanent. This is the new normal. It's one thing when you've got a lousy economy in the middle of a recession. You figure, hey, the clouds will blow over and it'll clear up and things will be okay. But when you've got this kind of economy without a recession, it really says that there are permanent policies in place that are stopping the economy from recovering. So I maintain that we are no longer sick because of the recession. We are sick because of the cure to the recession that Obama passed. Reminds me of how in the Middle Ages they said a guy had evil spirits that were making him sick. So they'd cut him open and they'd take out blood to get rid of the evil spirits. And then when he was half dead, they'd say, see, he still has evil spirits, and they'd take out the rest of his blood. And when he dropped dead, they'd say, I told you he had evil spirits. Well, Obama keeps sending these stimulus packages, which borrow more and more money, crowd out anybody who wants to borrow money to buy anything or create any jobs, and he's just elbowing everybody aside at the loan window, and he's spending money to stimulate job creation. Well, it's not working, and it's having the opposite effect, and the economic statistics, I think, really prove that.
Today, the president announced in his radio chat green job technology as a way to try to get Americans back to work. Is this more window dressing for a problem that he still can't figure out?
Well, it's more windmill dressing. I think that the point is, where are jobs going to be created in our economy? Who's going to do it? The medical sector, that's 16% of our economy. They are terrorized because of Obamacare. Who's going to open a new CAT scan unit and hire a staff of radiologists when next year the federal government will probably disallow reimbursement for it? The medical industry, one of our big sources of growth, is frozen. The manufacturing industry, another 11% of our economy, well, they're scared to death of cap and trade, cap and tax. They're not going to open a new wing on a factory and hire new workers because they're going to be taxed next year, and they're probably going to have to move offshore because they're going to pay a tax on their energy use that China and India are not going to have to pay. And the only reason we haven't been fully put out of business by Chinese manufacturing, we still produce a quarter of the world's manufactured goods in the U.S., same as we did 10 and 20 years ago. The reason we're able to do that is that we've reduced the number of jobs because we've increased our dependence on energy. When I worked for Clinton, manufacturing had 18% of the labor force. Now it has 11%. But we produce twice as much as we did when we had 18. And that automation all means a lot of energy use. So when we start taxing the energy use, like cap and trade will, and not taxing India and China in their energy use, you're killing us, and the jobs will go offshore, so they're not going to add any jobs. How about the energy sector, 6 or 7% of our economy? No one's going to invest in energy. Green jobs, yeah, but how much can you invest in windmills? I mean, he's taxing coal, he's going to tax crude oil, he's banned offshore oil drilling, and the EPA is now investigating shale drilling with the possibility of banning or heavily regulating that. So where are you going to invest in energy? The financial sector, another 15% of the economy, they are scared to death because of the new financial regulation bill that says that you make whatever loans you want, but unless they're repaid, unless you are absolutely clear that they're all coming in and all being repaid, the federal government, can move in, seize your bank, fire you, fire your staff, replace your board of directors, wipe out your shareholder equity, which is your 401k, your pension, and sell off units of your bank. But hey, take a chance, find the next Google or the next, incubator computer idea in a garage, but you better be sure all of it's paid back. So those banks have columns and edifices, and they look like the Parthenon, but they're really mausoleums. There's no lending going on inside them. Okay, so you're not going to have medical, manufacturing, energy, or finance. What's left? That's 60% of the economy. You know what's left? The 40% that's government. And that is really what Obama's strategy is, put everything under the government.
Dick, yesterday I talked to Dinesh D'Souza, and he said that part of Obama's mission is to make this country as poor as possible. Is that so that he can simply blanket his agenda across America? He purposely wants to depress the economy?
No, I don't think that. I don't think he purposely wants to. I think that I do believe that his top priority is social engineering, not recovery from the recession. He wants to change America more than he wants it to recover. And if you forced him to answer truthfully, he would say that his policies are not necessarily in the national interest, but he would defend them as being in the interest of what he would call social justice, which means kind of leveling. And to a certain extent, he has a case. In 1990, the top 1% of the country made 8% of the money. Now they make 22% of the money. But they used to pay 21% of the taxes, and now they pay 40% of the taxes. And the answer is not to level by dumbing down. The answer is to level by moving up. Now, liberals are fond of citing a statistic, which is, they divide the country by the top fifth, the next, and the bottom fifth, each 20%. And they say the top 20% is moving way up, and the bottom 20% is stagnating. And that's how they get that the rich are getting richer and the poor are not moving up. But in my book, 2010, I point out, they did a study in 1990 where they tracked the people that were in the bottom fifth, and they tracked them for 10 years. And they found that by 2000, only 17% were still in the bottom fifth. 16% were in the top fifth, and the others were in the three-fifths in between. In other words, there's tremendous individual upward mobility. The American dream is working. The problem is that there are new people coming in the bottom fifth. You get immigrants coming in, you get a whole new generation of poor people, and yeah, they haven't begun the upward mobility yet. But the ones that came in 10 years ago, they're moving up. And I think that Obama is discounting that, and I think he's adopting policies in the interest of what he would call fairness, which in fact level us out, dumb us down at a level of no economic growth.
Dick, what do you think the real unemployment number is?
20%. You have about a little less than 10% that are unemployed. Then you have, well, actually, it's more like about 25. Then you have 7% who are underemployed. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics has 17.8 as the rate of under or unemployment. So, you lost your job and you sell hot dogs, but, that's not a job. It's a makeshift. And then about 8% of the labor force has dropped out, stopped looking for a job. One of the big things that happened during the Clinton years is not only did we lower unemployment down to 4%, we grew the labor force from about 55% of the adult population to about 61%. And now it's gone back down to 55 again as older people stop working and women decide to stay home with their kids and be a single earner household, and people are discouraged about not being able to make a living, so they drop out of the labor force.
We are in a very fast hour, and then Dick is going to sign copies of his book. We're live on WNDB, and here at the College of Aviation Atrium, Linnell Craig is going to make her way through the audience quickly. If you have a question for Dick, just raise your hand, and Linnell will come to you. While we wait for our first question, let's go to a cell phone. And David, you're on WNDB with Dick Morris. Your question.
Hey, David. How are you doing?
Thank you very much, Mark. Dick?
Yes.
What will be the impact of the Tea Party after the midterms, and particularly with Michelle Bachmann, the congresswoman out of Minnesota, who is the chairperson of the Tea Party caucus? Thank you.
Good. I couldn't make out the whole question, but I made out the word Tea Party.
Yeah. The impact.
And I spoke at a Tea Party rally yesterday in Orlando, and we had 800 people there at noontime. It was really incredible. And on Saturday, I went to Wisconsin, and I spoke at a Tea Party rally in Maryland, Wisconsin, which is in the lumber area. And I swear it was like talking to an audience of grizzly bears. They had these huge beards and big lots of winter body fat and sweatshirts and sweaters and jackets on, and everybody was like this. It was really fun. But 400 of them in the middle of the day. And I think the Tea Party movement is fantastic. I think that it really represents grassroots democracy at its best. And I think it has three missions. One is to cleanse the Republican Party. And they ran primary fights, almost all of which they won. And they got rid of the would-be Republicans like Charlie Crist and exposed them for the fakers and phonies that they are. And Lisa Murkowski, who is corrupt. She's sincere, but she's corrupt. and you got a lot of people elected who were really strong conservatives. And I think that was terrific. But then the second mission is now which is to energize the Republican Party and impel it to victory. And I think they're doing that. I think that's why we're winning seats all over the country. I believe we'll take the House and the Senate, and we're winning races nobody imagined you could win, like beating Corinne Brown, for example. So that's the second mission. But the third mission is the key one. Once you elect these folks, you got to keep them honest. And the mission of the Tea Party is to stay in session, stay out in the streets, stay out there, remain as a force, and pressure them to vote for no new taxes. Because a funny thing happens when you go to Washington. If you don't drink bottled water, there's something in the water supply there that makes you liberal. And the Tea Party movement, which of course drinks only tea, boils the water first, is immune to that, and that's why we need the Tea Party.
13 years ago, I met you for the first time at the Heritage Foundation. Same day you came in with Dick Armey, and I still have that picture hanging in my office, and we talked about a book you were writing then. My question is, because people have asked me, has Dick Morris gotten more conservative over the last 13 to 15 years?
Yeah, sure I have, but so has the country. I mean, I've watched what's going on. When people say, how could you work for Bill Clinton and now be against Barack Obama? I say, hey, we balanced the budget. We cut out the deficit. We cut the capital gains tax. We signed welfare reform. Wouldn't it be nice if we had that back as opposed to what's going on now? Ronald Reagan used to say, I didn't leave the Democratic Party, it left me. So I used to be, like many of you, a conservative Democrat. There used to be such a thing. There used to be such a thing as a Southern Democrat, a conservative Democrat, who was not following the leadership of the National Party. And I was always one of those. And Bill Clinton, when he was president, was one of those. He moved to the left, dragged kicking and screaming by Hillary since then, but he was one of them. But now there is no such thing. It's an oxymoron. At best it's an oxymoron. At worst it's a consumer fraud. There is no such thing as a conservative Democrat. You're either a Reid, Obama, Pelosi Democrat, or you are a Republican. When they need 60 votes, they get 60 votes. When they need 218, they get 218. If they needed every single Democrat, all 249 of them to vote for health care, they would get all 249 of them. So there is no such thing anymore as a conservative Democrat, and I have become a Republican as a result.
We're going to take phone calls, too, at 239-0033, AT&T star 1150 in this fast hour with Dick Morris. He'll be signing copies of his book, 2010, Take Back America. Our partners at the Embry-Riddle bookstore here as well. Let's go to the audience, where Linnell has our first question from our assembled audience here at the College of Aviation.
Thank you, Mark.
Hey.
Good morning, Dick.
Good morning.
I saw you this morning. I don't want to act like I'm stalking you, but I was so entranced by your speeches last night and this morning, I wanted to follow up and ask you another question here.
Yeah, I spoke at this event this morning after I spoke to the same people the night before. And I felt like I was a kid. Everybody was saying, oh, last night was good for me. Was it good for you, too?
One question I didn't get a chance to ask you was, it looks like Governor Christie in New Jersey has found the spine to do something that we had hoped that maybe Schwarzenegger would do in California, Patterson in New York, Granholm in Michigan. He's taken on the unions, and as a result has gained a lot of popularity from the populace. Would you comment on Governor
Sure.
Christie's efforts and what you think he's going to be able to do for the state?
Well, I'm glad you said he found the spine to do it. That was an appropriate choice of the anatomy for radio. Christie has done a great job. Even better is McDonnell, the governor of Virginia, who has cut spending back to 2006 levels. But you're correct in identifying the unions as being the problem. We do not control our state governments or our local governments, and we certainly have no control over our schools. They are run by the public employee unions. They acquire political power, they require contractual power, institutional power, and they run the public services, not in the interest of the consumers, but in the interests of the employees. Albert Shanker, the founder of the teachers union, said it best. He said, when kids start to pay union dues, I'll fight for better schools. And that really is the attitude of many of these unions. But it's coming to an end. I believe that what's going to happen is that a number of these states, California, New York, Connecticut, Illinois, maybe Michigan, are spending so much more than they're taking in and relying so heavily on one-shot bailouts from Washington that they are going to come back to Washington next year and beg for additional money. And this time, I think the Republican Congress is going to say, no, you made your bed, you lie in it. And then I think the bond agencies will refuse to rate or buy their bonds, not just long-term bonds, but short-term bonds, the equivalent, if you're in government, to payday loans, where you want the money for 90 days till your tax receipts come in. And people will add up the numbers and say, you're functionally in bankruptcy. I'm not going to lend you money. And I think then they will come back to the Congress, just like Greece came to the International Monetary Fund and begged for a guarantee of the debt. And then I hope that the federal government, led by the Republicans in Congress, say, we will only help you out if you agree to go through a procedure we will legislate for state bankruptcy. There's currently a procedure for cities to go bankrupt, but not states. And under that procedure, you have to abrogate your union contracts. You have to free yourself of those, of the pension obligations to existing workers, not retired workers, that you can't change, but to existing workers who haven't started collecting the pensions yet, to the pay scales, to the work rules, and reshape your state so that it's economically viable, so that you're not killing yourself, and work your way out of bankruptcy just like any private company does. And that's what we insist upon. And I think that's going to happen. I think Obama will veto it. But then I think there'll be a game of chicken in which it'll be clear that the unions are trying to keep power, even if it means destroying the institutions at which they work. And I think that that's going to be the beginning of the end of public employee unions, just as the air traffic controllers strike was at the federal level.
Dick, on Greta Van Susteren, Hannity, and the Sean Hannity program, and Bill O'Reilly, you spoke openly about how good of a candidate you thought that the congressman, former congressman, attorney general now, Bill McCollum, was for governor, yet Rick Scott won. Are you ready to embrace Scott? Can he win as governor for Florida?
No.
Really? Okay. Why? No, that you don't embrace him, or no, he won't win?
No, I don't embrace him.
Okay.
And we're not going to support him. I'm not going to elaborate. I'm not in the business of campaigning against Republicans, but I'm not voting for him.
Okay. Let's go back to the audience now. Here's Linnell.
John Kennedy said it best. Sometimes party loyalty asks too much.
Okay. Jimmy?
Good afternoon. Hey, Mark. Hey, Dick. I just wanted you to kind of explain a little bit, and do you think the Tea Party effect comes from the fact that the candidates and the campaign strategists actually see and face the people more instead of planning for a TV type of campaign? And do you think the fact that Nancy Pelosi stepped in, I mean, the speaker rarely votes unless there's a need to, and do you think the fact that she stepped in the other day and broke a 209 tie when they were fully ready to vote on the Bush tax cuts, do you think that that's going to cost the Democrats actually more seats in November than the bloodbath that is expected?
Well, the answer to your second question is simple. Yes, it will, because the Congress, in effect, allowed the biggest tax increase in history to take place. And I think people are going to realize that because of their action, a family that makes $50,000 is going to have to pay $2,400 in additional taxes under this bill, under this non-bill. But your first question is just terrific, and I'm so glad you asked it and phrased it that way, because it puts the Tea Party movement in historical perspective. The machines used to control politics in the United States. They used to decide who got nominated and who got elected. And then in 1964, when the Republicans nominated Goldwater and defeated Rockefeller, who the establishment wanted, and in 1972, when the Democrats nominated George McGovern and defeated Hubert Humphrey, who the establishment wanted, power briefly returned to the people and away from the political machines. And that development lasted for 10 minutes because television came right in and squelched the emerging power to the people. Johnson ran all of his ads and defeated Goldwater, and Nixon ran all of his and defeated McGovern, and the television era was upon us. And for the next 40 years after that, television ruled the political process. And a guy like me would meet with an ad person and a fundraiser and the candidate, and we'd meet in a telephone booth and we'd run the campaign. You know, I've worked in politics for 40 years and I never met a voter. You know, I read about you all in my computer printouts. I know what every left-handed man between 40 and 50 thinks about abortion and everything else, but I never actually had to meet one. But then, first on the left with MoveOn.org and Come Home America and Acorn and all of those groups, a grassroots really began to develop. And now it's been taken up on the right, first with the Swift Boat people and now with the Tea Party. And the result has been that television is losing its power to control our politics. First of all, fewer people are watching television. The nightly newses, for example, when I worked for Clinton, 20% watched them. Now only about 15 watch the three of them combined. And people are not watching less prime time, less daytime. Now, politicians are responding to this by buying 4 times as many ads to try to catch everybody, even in the limited amount they do watch. But the internet and personal conversations and grassroots campaigning is taking the place of television. It's making campaign finance reform obsolete because you can raise more money cheaper and better and cleaner online than you can by visiting every fat cat and hoping to ask for some money. So I believe that process is going ahead. I think it's terrific, and I think that it is permanently changing our country for the better. Just look at voter turnout. In 1996, there were 95 million people who voted for president. Last year, there were 128 million, and not much of an increase in population. I mean, that just is incredible in what it shows and interest. And I think this year, it's an off-year election, for goodness sakes. You can almost see the lines forming at the polling stations now.
Let's take a call from Chris in Daytona Beach. Thank you. Briefly, your question for Dick Morris. Hello.
Hey, Dick, I think you said that Obama's popularity in Europe is that if he fails, it's bad for them financially.
In Europe, you said, yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I was on the O'Reilly show a couple of weeks ago from Rome, and I told Bill I'd be happy to do the show. So he said, why do Italians love Obama? Why do Europeans love Obama? And I said that it's because they need to plug the leak in their entitlement culture. Because Lenin, the leader of Russia, said it best. He said, you can't have socialism in just one country, because the capital will move to the other country. So in 1981, Mitterrand became the president of France, and he nationalized everything, and all the capital went to Thatcher's Britain and Reagan's America. So the European Common Market recast itself as the European Union, which would impose their socialist entitlement programs on all of Europe, including Britain. But then capital fled to the United States. We've had 80% of the new jobs created since 1980 have been right in the United States. And what Obama does is he's going to bring us into the same regulation so that capital will have no place to go, and everybody can get their 8 weeks vacation. Everybody can get a rule that says you can't be fired no matter how incompetent you are. It's as hard in Europe to fire a private sector worker in a assembly line as it is to fire a cop or a teacher here. Almost impossible to do it. I know of a family in France that had a nanny, and the nanny was having an affair with the husband. And they were allowed to fire the nanny, but they weren't allowed to throw her out of the house. Because the law said that's her residence, that's where she lives. And they had to actually pay her to move out. So these work rules or in France, you're not allowed to work more than 35 hours a week. You have to pay a fine if they catch you. Why? because they're saying if you work more than 35 hours, you're taking the job away from another person. You're eating into his 35 hours. So if you want to do a lot of overtime to make a lot of money to buy a new house or a car or help send your children to college, you can't do it. You're only allowed to work 35 hours. So the message is be dependent, let the government take care of you, don't work so hard. Life is there for vacations and for time off. Work is an unpleasant burden. And that just is not the American way. That's not our entrepreneurial spirit.
Dick Morris is with us. This is the President's Speaker Series from the College of Aviation Atrium at Embry-Riddle, also broadcast live on WNDB and being watched live on the internet, www.kennytv.com. And you'll be able to see this full interview in its entirety there as well. Dick, for those who haven't heard you speak or seen you on television in the last few days, what's the number you're talking about for conversion? Republican seats in the House and in the Senate, do we take both chambers?
Yes, we will take both chambers, I believe. In the House, it's a moving target. We need 39 seats to take control, and we really have those pretty much in the bag. There are another 15 or 20 seats that I think we're ahead in and have a very good chance to win. Right now, there are 54 seats held by Democrats where Republicans have the lead in the published polls. There are another 19 seats where the Republicans are within 5 points, so that would come to 73. And then there are a lot of seats, 160 actually, that are held by Democrats where there is no polling, because nobody in their wildest dreams imagined that the Republicans could possibly win them. And what we're doing now is looking at some of those seats and saying, well, one of them I know, John Dingell, the guy who basically wrote the health care bill, he's been in House of Representatives for 55 years. And his father was in office since 1932, his father took office. And then he inherited the seat. I think he had to win an election or two, but, you know, it basically was in the will. And you know, it's a covenant, goes with the land. and Dingell is now behind in Michigan. A guy named Rob Steele is running against him, has a shot at it.
Is one of those seats Rick Boucher in Virginia, 24 years?
Boucher is about 8 points ahead of Morgan Griffin, who's running. And in fact, I just was in touch with Griffin's campaign, and I'm raising some money for him. It's those kind of seats. It's Barney Frank's seat. It's Steny Hoyer's seat. Not Nancy Pelosi's yet, but major seats. So at the moment, I'm only willing to stick my neck out for 60 to 80. But I'm launching a project in the next few days. If you go to my website, dickmorris.com, and sign up, I'll send you an email about it called Project 100, which is to raise money for the next 30 or 40 seats that have never been in play that we might win, one of whom is Corinne Brown against Michael Yost right here in Central Florida. Now, in the Senate, there are 8 states now represented by Democrats where the Republicans now have the lead. North Dakota, Arkansas, Indiana, Colorado, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, West Virginia, and Illinois. 8 states. Now, the 9th state is Nevada. And I believe that Harry Reid is stuck dead in the water at 44%. He has not moved up since August 1st, ever since his horrific negatives were rebutted effectively, and now he's been advertising like crazy and he can't seem to move up, and he's throwing everything he's got and it's not working. That would be the 9th seat. I think we're going to win that. The undecided vote usually goes against the incumbent. It's like if I ask you, you're going to be married to the same person next year, and you tell me I'm undecided. That does not indicate a high degree of domestic felicity in your house. So if you say you can have the same senator next year and you say I'm undecided, you're probably going to vote against him. And then there's the 10th seat. We need 10 to win. I think the most likely one right now is Washington State, where Dino Rossi is taking on Patty Murray and is now slightly ahead. There also is a good chance in New York State, where Joe Diaguardi is the Republican nominee against the senator appointed to fill Hillary's seat, Kristen Gillibrand, and he's only 1 behind. And we have a very good chance in Connecticut, where Richard Blumenthal, newly back from the service in Vietnam that he didn't have, And he's only 4 points ahead of Linda McMahon of Wide World of Wrestling, and she specializes in SmackDown. So we have a shot there. And we also have a shot in California against Barbara Boxer. And we have a shot with Christine O'Donnell in Delaware. I just sent an ad proposal into the Republican committee, and I hope they run it. It starts with a black castle with spider webs and goblins and everything. And it says, we're a month before Halloween and everybody's talking about, and then we put Oberman and Maddow and Korrick's broadcast on saying witchcraft, witchcraft, witchcraft. But then the castle becomes the Capitol building. And we say, but it's here in Washington that the real black magic is taking place. Voodoo budgets, demonic deficits, and a coven of 3 witches who are brewing up new tax increases. And we have Reid, Pelosi, and Obama caricaturized as witches. I might add, for one of those, the caricature was easier to draw than the other two. And then we say it's to fight that kind of witchcraft that Christine O'Donnell wants to go down to Washington to bring jobs back to Delaware. So I think Christine O'Donnell has a shot.
Let's go back to the audience now. Jimmy, your question.
Yes, Dick, I had an opportunity to see you last night. I want to thank you for coming to visit us here in Volusia County. One of the 8 that you mentioned for Senate that you believe we're going to win was Illinois. And I don't know if that is the Barack Obama seat or not.
Yes, it is.
And I thought that it was. I recently had an opportunity to go to Chicago within the past month, and there is the Democratic candidate's name is Alexei something or other.
Janulius.
Yes.
He's a piece of work.
Well, the ads on TV, he is on Barack Obama's coattails. It is Barack Obama saying, I know Alexei, he's my friend, you can trust him. And they're on every hour. And you're telling me we're going to win this seat in Illinois that is the Barack Obama seat. I'm very interested in, I think that should be the bellwether of the nationwide campaign against Barack Obama. And I'd like to hear what you say about that.
Now, in most of the country, when there's an ad of Obama endorsing a Democrat, it's paid for by the Republican Party. But Janulius is a piece of work. This guy is the state treasurer of Illinois. I mean, he's an indictment waiting to happen. He got his job because he was the head of a private family bank for 20 years. And 3 months ago, the FDIC raided the bank and closed it down because it made $32 million of loans to mobsters. And they didn't use pseudonyms. They would sign the loan document, you know, Three-Fingered Louie or something, and they'd get the loan. And Kirk is, I think, about 4 points ahead of Janulius, and I think he's going to win that election. He has 6 times as much money as Janulius does. And I think we're going to win Barack Obama's seat in the Senate.
Our next question is our
I got
town
to tell
hall.
you, that's one I wish we didn't win. I wish he was still there.
Go back to the audience. Precious minutes here before the book signing begins. Question now in the audience. Hello. Sia.
Hi, as a first-time voter, what advice do you have for me and other young voters in the upcoming midterm election?
Well, I think that young people go through a transition, a coming of age. It's sort of political puberty. It's what happens when they get their first paycheck and they think they're making $400 a week and it comes back $228. And they suddenly realize that $178 went someplace and went away in state taxes and local taxes and school taxes and Medicare taxes and Social Security taxes and workers' compensation taxes and unemployment insurance taxes, and you end up with about 60% of what you think you're making. And all of those theoretical discussions in college about class warfare and Marxist economics and all that kind of go out the window in the face of the first paycheck. For young people who are voting, this election determines your future. I mean, I'm 64. I mean, most of us who've lived a while have made some money, and we may be suffering now, but we have something to fall back on. When you're just getting out of school, the unemployment rate is you. And Obama has really created a situation in which you cannot create jobs. People aren't going to spend money because they're afraid of the high taxes. You take an example, inheritance taxes. Before I wrote my last book, I didn't care about the inheritance tax. I said, hey, 2% of the country pays it. Who cares if rich people can pass on to their kids? They'll probably mess it up anyway, probably ruin their lives, the inheritance. But then I spoke to some economists about it, and I realized that it's a terrible tax. Because you get somebody who's 75 or 80 years old, and he's the head of a business, and he makes $500,000, and his business is worth $10 million. What he'd usually do is plow that back into the business to create jobs, to hire you, and he'd create new jobs with it. But he's 80 years old. He might die tomorrow. And if he died tomorrow, the inheritance tax means he would have to pay $4.5 million to the government within 160 days of his death. And they don't have $4.5 million lying around. He has $10 million in the business. That's what they're taxing, or in his farmland, or in his home. But he'll have to sell that to be able, his heirs will have to sell that to pay the tax. And that means he spends the last 10 years of his life stockpiling cash, putting it under his mattress or in the bank where it doesn't do anybody any good, as opposed to reinvesting it and creating jobs. So the consumers aren't spending because they're worried about high taxes. The banks aren't lending because they're terrified of federal regulation and takeover. Older people who run the businesses are not reinvesting because they're worried about the inheritance tax. The medical industry isn't growing because they're worried about federal regulation. Manufacturing and energy isn't growing because it's worried about cap and trade. So precisely where are these jobs going to come from? That's what young people need to think about.
Before we go back in the audience, one of your early clients years ago was a congressman we all know here pretty well, John Micah. He hired you either for his campaign or for Paula Hawkins.
Both.
For both. Okay. And he had told me that, your work was outstanding in helping to shape his campaigns. How many campaigns do you think you've helped shape in your career? Any idea?
Oh, my God. Ooh. I know I'm senile when I can't remember them all. Oh, I guess hundreds. What I do now a lot is I work abroad, and I have sort of two projects. One is to fight Chavez, and the other is to fight Putin. So
Wow.
The president or prime minister of Japan, Taiwan, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, Colombia, Mexico, Chile are all my clients. So
Let's go back in the audience now.
Dick, I hope you're not going to throw the water bottle at me, but would you agree that the centralization and growing of the government, the nationalization of industry, financial sector, medical sector, and media in Russia that has been done since Vladimir Putin taken power is eerily similar to what we have gone through in the last 20 months in the U.S.?
Yeah, in Russia, it's a little bit more pointed. It's the energy industry. Russia is a third world country with oil. I mean, there's really not a lot of difference between Russia and Saudi Arabia these days. The only difference is a very intelligent, highly educated population left over from the old Soviet school systems, particularly technically. But Russia has a gross domestic product of $1 trillion. U.S. is 14. Italy is 2. And half of it is in energy. And what Putin's done is taken that over and put it under state control. And I think the future of Russia is very grim, just like I think the future of the Middle East and the oil countries is grim. And I think that terrorism in long-range terms will go out of business, because I think that America is at last moving away from its dependence on oil. You look at the sales of electric cars, of hybrid cars. In China and the United States, I think we're really moving in that direction. Now, Obama wants to make us move away from coal also because of his concerns about climate change. And I believe that it's more important to free ourselves of oil dependency and go to electricity, which is largely made by coal. By the way, for the young lady that asked about her generation, let me just note that if you believe global warming and climate change is happening, Obama said the United States would reduce its carbon emissions by 17% by 2015. We have already reduced them by 10%. And next year it'll probably be the other 7. Not by regulation, not by taxing, not by cap and trade, but by a free people readjusting their living habits and a free market charging $3 a gallon for gas.
We got time for one more question before Dick signs books. Let's go back in the audience. Once again, I think Linnell has someone for us, and my man Duke.
Hey.
Hey, how are you, Dick? I've got a question for you. You touched on the influence of unions a few minutes ago, and what I've been really concerned with...
Influence of what, I'm sorry?
Of the unions?
Yes.
And especially in part of this question, how they're going to influence the vote and voter fraud. A lot of these, you mentioned a lot of seats are now in play that maybe weren't just a few weeks ago. Do you think that the Republican Party is, number one, vigilant to this, and number two, are they ready, willing, and able to contest these races where there's at least the appearance of voter fraud? Thanks.
I'm worried about that. It won't be enough to cost us Congress. We'll win both houses because the margins will be good enough, I think. But I'm worried about it, particularly in a number of House seats. I had a friend who I just met a few days ago. I was at a fundraiser for a woman running for Congress in Connecticut, who I think is going to win. And her campaign manager worked in Cincinnati for the McCain campaign in 2008. And his responsibility was to supervise 150 polling places, which cast an aggregate of 75,000 votes. And it was in a heavily Democratic area. And the issue was how many phony votes he could stop. And he would then challenge the vote, and it would be then an affidavit vote, where they would then verify whether the voter was entitled to vote if it made a difference in the outcome, which it didn't. But he told me that he stopped 6,000 votes out of 75,000 that he had to make affidavit ballots, most of which were probably illegitimate. So you're talking about a very significant order of magnitude. Now, that was in a Democratic district. In the Republican districts, it's not that much. But I think that the issue of voter fraud is terribly important. I do not see why it is an imposition or a chilling effect on the electorate to require someone to bring a photo ID to the polling place. You require it when they fly. You require it when they drive. We darn near require it when they walk. So I don't see why it's a problem when they vote.
Program note, our next event will be next Wednesday at Daytona Beach Shores Resort and Spa. Dr. Andrew Wakefield will be here to talk about his book, Callous Disregard, Autism and Vaccines. I want to thank Richard and Sia in our technical area here at IT at Embry-Riddle for all in facilities, Jerry Kenny and Seth Kenny at KennyTV.com for making this possible, and our partners at the bookstore. Dick will be signing copies of his book momentarily, and then he'll be winging his way out. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you for coming, Dick Morris.
Thank you. Thank you.
Your sign right here. Good to see you. That was sweet. Thank you. Should you sign mine? Sure. It's Marc, M-A-R-C.
Okay.